I introduce tonight's speakers, I'd like to briefly go over the format. Basically what we're going to have is a 10-minute opening statements by both speakers, and then we'll have 5-minute rebuttal periods. After that, we'll open up the room for questions to both speakers. And how we'd like to handle that is we'd like to form 2 lines, one for questions to Richard Bishop and one for questions to Wayne Caselli. And we'd like to kind of form them right here and down this row. And we'd like you to line up 5 at a time, and we'll alternate. And we'll do that for 30 minutes, so we'll get in as many questions as we can. Tonight, I know this is a very interesting issue to everybody here, and we'd like to keep this on a very professional basis on both sides. So if we can have your cooperation on that, it'd be much appreciated. I'd like to encourage you to write down your questions first, because as I am now, everyone gets a little nervous in front of the mic, and it goes a lot easier. So if you do that and hold the editorializing to a minimum, we'd appreciate it. And now to introduce the speakers. Speaking first tonight is, on my near right, Richard Bishop. Richard graduated from Iowa State University in 1962 with a Bachelor's of Science degree in Ecology and Wildlife Management. Richard also obtained a Master's of Science degree in Ecology and Wildlife Management from the University of Arizona in 1964. He then became a wildlife biologist for 2 years with the Montana Game and Fish Department. After that, he got involved, or he came to work in Iowa with waterfowl, as a waterfowl research biologist with the Iowa Conservation Commission, which is now the Department of Natural Resources. That was from 65 to 79. From 79 to present, he has been in the central office of the Department of Natural Resources. First as the head of research, and in the last 7 years, he served as the chief of the Wildlife Bureau for the DNR. And on my far right this evening is Wayne Caselli. Wayne is a leading expert on hunting issues in the United States. After graduating in environmental studies from Yale University in 1987, Wayne worked in Washington, D.C. as a lobbyist for the National Alliance for Animal Legislation. From there, Wayne became associate editor of the Animals Agenda, a national animal advocacy magazine. Wayne is now the national director of the Fund for Animals, one of the nation's largest and most aggressive animal rights organizations. And now I'd like to turn you over to Richard Bishop, who will speak first tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody hear me? Is mic's on?
It can be turned off.
Pardon? Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be here tonight to discuss an issue that I think is very close to all of us, regardless of your views and personal preferences. The aspect is hunting. But all of you must realize this is not just a debate on hunting. It is a debate on the policy of the way people live their lives. The bottom line is animal rights, not the welfare of animals. Comments made on hunting this evening are surface discussions of a far deeper and questionable philosophy. The Fund for Animals is one of the few groups of animal rights organizations. These organizations believe there should be no hunting, no animal agriculture, no medical use of animals, no pet ownership, or basically no human use of animals. To quote Tom Regan in a publication on animal rights, said, "It is not larger, cleaner cages that justice demands, but empty cages. Not traditional animal agriculture, but a complete end to all commerce in the flesh of dead animals. Not more humane hunting and trapping, but the total eradication of these barbarous practices." And there's been quotes of a much more radical nature from some animal rights groups. And to quote one of these views from Ingrid Newkirk from the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA, she stated in September '89 issue of Vogue magazine, quote, "Even if animal research resulted in a cure for AIDS, we'd be against it." To put this in perspective this evening, Mr. Pasali is a vegetarian, as are most animal rights advocates. Leaders of the Iowa State University Humane Society, co-sponsors of this debate, have stated publicly that their goal is to eliminate all animal husbandry, which would in turn eliminate most of the demand for agricultural production, corn and soybeans, since most of these crops are fed to livestock. They have stated most of Iowa should be returned to a prairie ecosystem with native herbivores like bison and predators like wolves. This is an idyllic dream that would be appreciated by many hunters, I'm sure, but not very practical to most of our society today. The audience needs to understand that these opinions are not shared by most people. A Gallup poll conducted in August 1990 found only 7% of the American public agrees with the animal rights views. The heart of this discussion on hunting is really animal rights, I feel, versus animal welfare. Animal welfare is treating animals humanely with respect for their position and purpose in the animal kingdom. Should animals be used for production of beef, pork, chicken, hunting, medical research, or for pets? In poll after poll, the American public has upheld hunting for meat as a legitimate activity. All wildlife biologists, at least the ones I've been associated with, are all animal welfareists. And every hunter, trapper, farmer, and animal researcher should be. Most Iowans believe in using animals for food and clothing. Humans have evolved as the top predator in the animal world. This comes from a long, long back, the first time man really started foraging out in more open areas. Early in their development, humans were hunters for food, and hunting was carried into the modern world along with raising livestock. Both of these practices, done humanely, are responsible uses of animals. Humans cannot be taken out of the ecological equation. They cannot be taken out of it, but must be placed in proper perspective with other species. Therefore, that makes us have proper respect for other species also. Hunting has a strong ecological basis. Regulated hunting does not endanger the population of game animals, but in although Leopold's words, it is a function that harvests an annual surplus of animals, much like the production of domestic animals. Small game animals like pheasants, squirrels, and rabbits have extremely short lifespans. Studies show that 60 to 75% or more of the individuals whose populations die each year. Small game species that exhibit high mortality rates, like rabbits and quail, compensate by producing many young each year to take care of this high mortality rate. Mourning doves, for example, have extremely high natural mortality rates. An annual harvest of 50 million doves, which is only 10% of the estimated population of doves, by hunters simply compensates for the high natural losses. The end result of hunting is relatively no change in mourning dove numbers. Iowa does not have a mourning dove season. And dove populations are no higher in Iowa than they are in Kansas or Missouri or some of the other states where hunting takes place on a regular basis. We are not overrun with robins or other songbirds. Natural mortality is high on those species, much like doves. Big game animals like deer, on the other hand, are longer lived and produce fewer young. In the natural scene, predators, including man, have kept big game numbers in check, but humans have eliminated the major large predators such as grizzly bears, mountain lions, and wolves from the landscape because we will not tolerate livestock depredation or human life endangerment. Without hunting, the population of white-tailed deer would be many times higher than what it is right now. Damage to agricultural crops, personal property such as shrubbery, flowers, and endangerment to human life through car, deer accidents would be much higher. Deer populations in Iowa will not be held in check by disease or starvation, because our habitat on agricultural ground, especially like large cornfields, just provide a mass corn forest for deer, which is with an unlimited food supply and very good protective cover. Death of individual animals is the only way to stop unchecked growth of deer populations. Hunting is the most humane of all the effective alternatives to controlling deer numbers in Iowa. Hunting today is a choice people have and should continue to have as long as this choice does not adversely impact animal populations or other segments of society. It is clearly a choice people should have. Animal rights advocates believe you should not have a choice, but be bound to live under their view of life. Our country was not founded on that tradition. I fully respect somebody's view of not wanting to kill anything. Hunting is regulated by professionally trained wildlife biologists geared by scientific facts to benefit wildlife populations by providing habitat to fill their basic life needs. The most needed ingredient of any species is a place to live with food and shelter. Wildlife agencies, through license fees, purchase and manage habitat for all wildlife species, conduct research to best respond to essential needs of wildlife, and pay for enforcement laws governing this wildlife. Present Iowa sportsmen are contributing $12 million annually in license fees and excise taxes to manage wildlife populations and habitats. Through license dollars, federal excise tax on sporting arms and ammunition, and donations from sporting groups like Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, Wetlands for Iowa, Isaac Walton League, etc., raise over $15 million annually to manage these wildlife populations. Granted, hunters have a selfish motivation in putting their dollars to work, creating more and better habitat for hunted species, so there are more animals to hunt and trap. Land acquisition and management using these dollars have protected all major habitats in Iowa: grassland, shrublands, woodlands, wetlands, the whole ecological aspects of Iowa. These habitats benefit more non-hunted species than hunted ones. Bobolinks, northern harriers, short-eared owls, upland sandpipers, grebes, bitterns, to name a few, are benefiting from the recently restored wetlands and grasslands that the Prairie Pothole joint venture of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan is currently protecting. Without sports people's concern over these species, a lot of the wetlands that are now in protection of 50,000 acres in the state would not be there. We are putting $2 million annually into the protection of wetlands and grasslands. Originally in this state there were 3 to 4 million acres of wetlands in Iowa. Today, less than 2% of those original wetlands remain. Only a trace of the once 30 million acres of prairie land exists. This habitat did not have a selfish group of people looking out after its welfare. I believe the only hope animals have is that people clearly understand their role in the ecological system as a hunter and a controller of the environment. Without people like hunters, trappers, and wildlife viewers, our expanding society will convert basic wildlife habitats to shopping malls, cities, factories, and roads with little opposition. This could truly endanger the future of many wildlife species. Thank you.
I want to thank Mr. Bishop for agreeing to debate this evening, and also to thank the ISU Humane Society for inviting me and sponsoring this event and advertising it. Just want to begin by, I think, perhaps debunking some ideas about animal rights philosophy and animal rights advocates. I've never said, and I'm not aware of anyone who's ever said, that human beings and non-human animals, you'll notice I use that word non-human animals because humans are in fact animals. It's ever said that humans and non-human animals are equal. They're not. There are certain distinct differences between us and them. But there are certain relevant capacities in which we are so sufficiently similar to them, mainly the ability to experience pleasure and pain, because they have nervous systems just like we do, certainly the higher mammals and birds and other animals, that we should give them a greater measure of respect. And they're not just implements or expedients for our use. They're not resources to be harvested, as the game manager might say. They're not tools for research, as the researcher might say. They're not units of production, as the factory farmer might say. We have treated animals like a bunch of things, and it's not surprising that there is massive institutional abuse of animals. Now, I became a vegetarian not because of any specific concern for individuals' animals' welfare, although now I clearly see that I am benefiting individual animals by not eating them, and the atrocious conditions on so many intensive confinement farms, not in the sense of the heat not being regulated or moisture not being present in the farms, but the fact that these social animals are denied their most basic instincts to interact, to move around, and then they're routinely mutilated. If it's chickens, their beaks are cut off, or pigs' tails mutilated. So many things that happen to these animals that clearly is cruel to them. But I became a vegetarian because of the environmental impacts. And perhaps Iowa is the greatest example of a state that has sustained enormous impacts to its native ecosystems from animal agriculture. 99% of the prairies are gone. As Mr. Bishop said, 98% of the original wetlands are gone. 70% of the native forests are gone. This is not success. It's not wildlife management or human management in the broader sense. It's not anything to be proud of. So much of it is gone because of an arrogant human attitude toward not only the non-human animals of the world, but the non-human world in general. And we do need a new attitude. And to grow corn and soybeans, to feed 80 or 90% of them to animals who inefficiently convert that to animal flesh so we can eat it, is not efficient, nor is it ecologically sustainable. And if 10 pounds of grain goes to produce 1 pound of animal flesh, that means 10 times as many wildlands and wetlands are destroyed. If pesticides are applied and it's done at organic agriculture, it means 10 times as many pesticides are put in the environment. It means manure pollutes our waterways, and it means so many devastating things to the environment. So clearly the best thing you can do for the environment is look at your food choices. And I'm not up here arguing that hunting is endangering all sorts of species and it's endangering ecosystems necessarily, but the broader human attitude that we have to animals and to this planet is devastating. We already have standards in this society against cruelty to animals. 50 states have statutes that say if one were to pump a broadhead arrow into a dog or a cat, you'd be arrested and prosecuted for wanton cruelty. You'd probably go to jail. 50 states have dog fighting prohibitions. 45 states have prohibitions on cockfighting. There are certain things, certain standards that we establish in society. If it happens to be the recreational preference of certain individuals to fight dogs or to fight chickens in rings, we say no. Your recreational preference doesn't come above and beyond the well-being of those individual animals. And somehow, as I mentioned, it's inappropriate to pump a broadhead arrow into a dog or a cat, but it is appropriate and socially acceptable to pump a broadhead arrow into a deer or a black bear, who are equally sentient mammals. That's an inconsistent standard. We would be appalled if bullfighting went on in this country. I hope most of us would. To see animals suffer, to benefit through recreation. Unnecessary. This is not the 17th century when perhaps hunting served some vital subsistence purpose, some vital purpose for human clothing to protect against the elements. This is the late 20th century when 93% of the public does not hunt, and those members of the public survive. When it's principally done for sport. Certainly, many hunters eat the flesh of the animals they kill. But that shouldn't be confused with saying that they must kill to survive. We have alternatives, we have options. The wolf doesn't posit a moral choice when the pack kills a caribou or a deer or a moose. Human beings have the capacity for moral choice. We live in supposedly a civilized society. We're supposed to treat our brothers and sisters well, and there are standards that dictate just treatment of other people. We should extend that just treatment standard beyond our species, to all species that feel pain in a fundamentally similar way to human beings. Certainly tonight we'll hear a lot about deer populations and how we must hunt deer populations to keep their numbers in line. And the implication there is that somehow we must hunt all animals to keep their numbers in line. That's a fallacy. It's dead wrong. There are more than 200 million animals killed in this country every year by sport hunting activity. And it's not just rifles and shotguns. It's bows and arrows, it's handguns, it's muzzle loaders. And if there were a hunting ethic, and I know there is rhetorically a hunting ethic that talks about a reliable kill, a one-shot kill, wouldn't we indeed use the most efficient weapons to dispatch animals? Why would we use the broadhead arrow, which more than 20 studies that the Fund for Animals has compiled indicate that for every animal hit with a broadhead arrow when retrieved by a hunter, there is one animal hit and left in the woods to die a lingering death. There are 4 million deer killed in this country and about 100,000 killed last year in the state of Iowa. There are 200 million animals killed, as I said, nationally. That's 2% of the total kill is deer. Mr. Bishop pointed out rightly so that mourning doves aren't hunted in this state, but they're hunted in 36 other states. 50 million are killed. There are anywhere in the range of 20 to 30 million quail that are killed, about 20 million pheasants, 10 million ducks. If we look to the mammals, as I said, 4 million deer, 150,000 elk, 120,000 pronghorn, more than 1,000 brown bears, grizzly bears, 20,000 black bears, and a long list of other species that are killed. There are no responsible ecologists that I'm aware of who would argue that doves and ducks and rabbits and squirrels and black bears and grizzly bears need to be killed to keep those animals within their biological carrying capacity. So if Mr. Bishop and other hunting advocates are prepared to say that we'll only hunt animals that we must control in terms of population, we'll wipe out all of hunting, I think, with very little debate, just about all hunting with very little debate, 97, 98% of it. There are egregious practices that go on in the name of sport. The fall flight forecast for ducks in the 1950s, when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service began censusing the birds, was about 100 million. Now it's 63 million. There's no question that wetland loss, as in Iowa and other states, is a principal factor in duck declines. But to shoot 10 million ducks out of the skies, almost 1/6 of the fall flight forecast, doesn't contribute to conservation. It doesn't contribute to duck survival. Pintails and scaup and blue-winged teal are in trouble. And they not only need more habitat, but they need to be protected from shooting. There are canned hunting operations in this country, whether it's mammals or birds. We have shooting preserves in Iowa where pheasants and quail and other birds are reared and released just to be shot, really indicating that the kill is an essential element of what's going on. One can go out in the woods and have the social camaraderie, see the sights, see the woods, and have all of that, but you don't necessarily have to kill animals and take their lives. The shooting preserve industry, whether it's exotic mammals like black buck antelope or African lions in Texas, or whether it's pheasants or quail or chukar on shooting preserves is an issue. It's an industry of wanton cruelty toward animals, and it's inconsistent with existing societal standards against the indiscriminate harming of animals. We have coyote killing in this state. There's an awful lot of talk about keeping deer numbers in line, and certainly that's an important question, and I hope we'll get into that question this evening. But it seems to me entirely inconsistent to be killing predators not only in the state of Iowa, but all across the United States, whether it's wolves in Alaska who are killed because state game agencies want the hunting license revenue for moose and caribou hunting. They don't want wolves killing those creatures because wolves don't pay for hunting licenses. Whether it's black bears in 28 states or mountain lions in 11 states that are hunted, or coyotes everywhere, and it is well documented that coyotes can kill deer, adult deer, and certainly are very efficient in killing deer fawns. But with deer hunting, I want to raise the issue that there are millions and millions of acres across this country where no hunting of any kind, not the predators, not the prey, not the small mammals, not the birds, are shot. And yet those animal populations are healthy and viable. We can look to the National Park Service as a management model, not allowing any hunting or trapping of any of those species, yet natural decimating factors limiting their numbers. 80 million acres from Everglades in South Florida to Denali in Alaska to Yellowstone to Shenandoah to Big Bend. So many areas don't have any hunting, yet those animal populations are healthy and viable. Later on, I'll talk more about deer. I certainly don't want to duck that question, but let's point out very clearly that the vast majority of hunting that goes on, pheasants, ducks, small game, there is no biological argument. It's a value that people think that animals are little more than animated targets. And that is what the animal rights movement is targeting itself, is the recreational killing of animals across the board, whether it's dogs and cats, or bears and deer, or pheasants and ducks. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne. I seriously doubt that many people in this audience, especially the hunters, would have very much to dispute with Wayne's opening comments on an attitude to protect habitat. I couldn't fully agree with him more. I think there is an attitude change that needs to come about on exploitation of our environment. You hear that every day. I think we differ on how we go about that, but I see people in the room that I've met in meetings that are contributing time and energy and personal finances to raise money, to go into sporting programs. They're buying land to restore wetlands. They do have that effort. They do have that feeling. I doubt if we do differ on that. I think there's a very strong feeling of sportsmen in this state that say we have to do something about our environment. We want marshes. We want to preserve and restore certain marshes. Last year, sportsmen spent $2 million to protect wetlands and restore them. I can't argue with that. Deer hunting, and I do hope we'll get into that, because that is an interesting aspect. I don't see alternatives for controlling deer populations. People that tolerate deer numbers or like deer and couldn't see how anybody could stand to shoot them, oftentimes change their mind once those deer are doing damage to their crops or their gardens or their yards. In fact, as I had one lady just recently in the town of Des Moines say she used to love those animals dearly, but she said, I would not have any problem with wiping one out right now because they are doing damage to her yard. She changed her attitude. It's all in all proper perspective. Yes, and Wayne mentioned that we have 200 million animals die each year. That's a big number. But if you just look at the aspect, we're talking about all kinds of animals, birds and things. We're talking about 500 million does in this country. Lots of wildlife species. That is a small, minute portion of the deaths that occur every year. So we got to watch how that number hits us. Small game. There's nothing to dispute on that. We're not shooting small game populations to keep a population from erupting and eating us out of house and home. That isn't why we hunt pheasants or quail. No argument. Those species that have a very high natural mortality rate, of those born or hatched each year, most of those animals are not going to be alive at the end of the year, whether you shoot one of them or not. And I guess it depends on how you want that animal to die. If you can accept that hunting is more inhumane than a predator catching a rabbit and pulling that rabbit piece by piece with that animal still alive, then you've got a different view of things than I do. I watched predatory birds. I used to have owls, and they didn't necessarily kill that bird or animal before they ate it. They tore those animals apart still alive. If you have any question of that, I hope some of you watch your educational channel lately, and you will see on those things a few of those nature programs, and just one recently where it showed wild dogs carrying the entrails out of a young animal while it was still alive. Ducks, you're in my specialty now, Wayne, and I've watched non-concern by the general public go downhill tremendously. We watch wetlands being drained, we watch duck populations go to blazes, and we screamed and yelled as professionals and hunters to see something change, and nobody seemed to care. Now we've started something to restore wetlands and do something about duck populations, and we are having an effect on ducks. We'll provide hunters and viewers and anybody down the road in 100 years at least the opportunity to see those ducks that wouldn't have been there if a hunter hadn't stepped up and said, I'm selfishly motivated, I want to protect those birds. And yes, hunting is killing. I don't personally relate to that killing. I don't particularly like it, and you can argue with me, and you can say and boo and hiss all you want to. That's not the thing that I look for in my hunting experience. It is an end part of it, without any question. But my experience with hunting is a reverence for wildlife, is a relationship with nature, is understanding that I have a place in that ecological system as a predator with that wildlife. Hunting is a conglomerate of things that we cannot pull out as killing or doing any one thing. It's hiking, it's bird watching, it's looking at vegetation. There's a lot of things that go into the aspect of hunting that is not simply described by killing. That's a very small part of it. And I guess my time has run out, so I will wait and discuss a couple other things on hunting issues and maybe the park system later. Thank you.
The question is, do you inflict pain on animals because you must, or because you choose to do so, even though you have another option? That's the question before us today. And I'm glad that Mr. Bishop concedes that for almost all species that are hunted, we don't need to hunt them to keep their numbers in line. We can shoot at inanimate targets, we can take a camera out in the woods, we can hike into the woods, we can do so many other recreational things to pass our time without extinguishing the life of a sentient mammal. And he points out that according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, there are anywhere from 450 million to 500 million doves, and that the 50 million that are killed are 1/10 of that population. Well, I'm not arguing here that dove populations are endangered. I'm arguing that those doves should have their lives determined by natural decimating factors and not the recreational guns of hunters. And I think it is very naive ecologically to assume that somehow all hunting substitutes for natural mortality. After the guns blaze and they're put to rest, and while they're blazing, natural factors are still taking their toll on animal populations. So hunting doesn't necessarily substitute for suffering in the wild, it adds to it. Perhaps one of the most egregious examples of human persecution of wildlife is trapping. Something that the DNR fully supports, Mr. Bishop's agency. Steel jaw leg hole trap, invented in 1823, it's stayed in similar form since that time. A brutally simple device, an indiscriminate device. It kills bald eagles, as the Des Moines Register pointed out a few weeks ago. 4 bald eagles were killed in just a 2-week, trapped, not necessarily killed right at this moment, in a 2-week span during the trapping season. Fur bearer management is a ruse. Trapping pressure is not dictated by biological concerns, it's dictated by pelt prices. And we've seen a dramatic decline in trapping because pelt prices have declined. It's not wildlife management that's being engaged in, it's trapper management. It's providing a recreational killing opportunity for a minimal financial return to certain people. A Gallup poll was quoted. What wasn't mentioned was that the Gallup poll was drafted by the National Shooting Sports Foundation, said that the American public doesn't support certain elements of animal rights activity. It was a biased poll. Alex Gallup renounced the poll and said it was flawed. One poll, or one survey that does have reliability was done by Dr. Stephen Keller, who's the leading academician on public attitudes toward wildlife, and he pointed out that 80% of the public opposes trophy hunting, 64% opposes sport hunting. I argue that almost all hunting that goes on is motivated by those concerns, to obtain a trophy or to have recreation. And again, I don't say that meat isn't consumed, but the principal motivation is to go out and recreate when it's not needed. I'm glad that Mr. Bishop is very well versed in duck population dynamics and what has happened to wetlands, and some of his public statements I've learned have been very forceful regarding the protection of wetlands. But all people on this issue concede that ducks are doing badly. How can anyone argue that it's still appropriate when certain hunting writers such as George Reiger and others say, lay down your guns, let duck populations come back? How can we argue that we should still be shooting 10 million ducks a year? It doesn't seem logical, doesn't seem sustainable. It's wildlife management by rolling the dice. Deer populations, and I said I wanted to get to this, and I probably just have one more minute. If we really wanted to limit deer populations, and we did still use hunting to do it, it would be intellectually honest only to shoot the female deer, because they are the reproducers, they're the ones that put the fawns back into the world. Hunting, since the modern system of game management was developed, has not been designed to limit deer population numbers. It's been designed to inflate them to provide sustainable shooting opportunities for hunting activity. That's why there's been male biased hunting in the state. That's why Mr. Bishop just a few weeks ago said that changes in this year's regulations are designed to decrease the take of does in most of northern Iowa to help increase their numbers in those areas. The objective of wildlife management is not necessarily to decrease conflicts between people and animals. It's to provide shooting opportunities, and I think that's an immoral activity.
Okay, now for about 30 minutes, we'll take questions for both speakers. Questions for Richard Bishop, if you would line up right here, and questions for Wayne Pacelli, if you would line up here. Let's keep the lines down about 5 at a time, if you could, please. Remember, everyone be professional. Also, I might mention you can address your question to one person or both speakers. If you address it to one person only, they will answer it. If you want to hear both sides, you address it to both speakers.
Hi, I have a couple of questions for Richard Bishop. Just one. I was wondering, as administrator for the Wildlife Division of the DNR, how you can espouse hunting, given the many negative impacts hunting has on biodiversity, and given the many negative habits, given the many negative impacts that hunting and the entire system of single species management has had on biodiversity.
Mike, I'm not so sure that I can answer that, because I'm not sure I understand it.
I don't know if I can rephrase it either. So.
I know what he's saying, but I know I'm not aware of any documented things that show that hunters have having a negative impact on biodiversity. In fact, I would challenge anybody in this room to find any places more biodiverse than our wildlife management areas. They have got all habitats protected. We do not destroy large acres of grassland for species that are probably benefited by woodlands. We protect all of those habitat areas for all game and non-game animals. And I would challenge anybody to show me where hunters have any negative impact on biodiversity. If I'm ignorant, then I apologize for that, but I don't know of anything that ever substantiates that.
Question for Wayne. So, Wayne, let's face facts. We all need to make a living somehow, and you've chosen the profession of being a wildlife biologist ultimately, and then followed that through with the funds for animals as the executive director. Now, have you really sold out to play on people's emotions, or are you really just trying to make a quick buck? Are you really sincere in your efforts to propagate certain species for your own financial well-being? And when I ask that, ultimately, quite frankly, I'll be honest with you, I'm sick and tired of seeing 6 or 7 doggone coons dead per square mile. And with that in mind, in addition, these ducks, let's face facts, muskrats, coon, possums, they play ravage on duck nests. Canada, in the last 3 or 4 years, has ultimately... My question is whether or not he's trying to play on people's emotions or objectively looking at the facts as a wildlife biologist trained in that field.
I don't believe that science is value-free. I think it reflects societal attitudes. And there are plenty of wildlife biologists, many of them work for the National Park Service, who manage animal populations without using hunting and trapping. I just want to make the point that the Fund for Animals is largely a group of volunteers. The president and the secretary of the organization are full-time volunteers. They don't receive any money. Though we have a staff of 30, there's no one who takes more than $30,000 in salary, and most of us happen to live in the East Coast, where city living rates are quite high. So I got into this because I care about wildlife. I have since I was a young child, and the particular form that it's taken has been to work with the Fund for Animals as of late.
My question is to Mr. Bishop, but Mr. Casella can also answer it. It is on the question of biodiversity, and that all the land that that is true, there is quite a bit that is bought, by hunters and through the DNR. But don't you mostly just manage the game species, and the other species, the non-game species, are in fact almost totally ignored, and that the management on those lands are not for those non-game species, but purely for the health of the game species?
Emphatically no. I have a staff of well-trained wildlife biologists that didn't go to Iowa State University, most of them, to learn only about hunted species. They learned about all the other raptors, songbirds. I think most of them took ornithology here, and they're very sharp at it. I have several people that are very active in the Audubon Society. No, those people, when they draft a management plan for their wildlife areas, are looking at grasslands for bobolinks. They're looking at grasslands right now for the northern harrier and the short-eared owl. How many of you people are actually doing anything to protect the grasslands for short-eared owls and northern harriers that went out of existence in this nesting species in this island? Nobody. Our wildlife biologists are addressing those things. We do not manage for just single species. We look at the whole composite of things. We have a non-game biologist and staff, and she is one of the most energetic, hard-pushing individuals in our state, and if you think you want to get something by her without getting challenged by it, you got another thing coming. No, we have an ecological management program in this state. Yes, we do look at specifically for wildlife species, and we do what we can for those hunted species, but not to the total destruction of any other species.
Mr. Pacelli?
It's indisputable that enormous numbers of native species have been extirpated from the state, and I don't argue that it was just hunting or even largely hunting that contributed to this condition. But it's not an appropriate indicator of wildlife health to count the number of deer and wild turkeys